If it weren't for the drought, we might think this is the golden era of agriculture. Commodity prices were high, farmland values soaring, and there were more markets for what farmers grew than ever before. But it might also be known as the golden era for what it takes to get into farming. Lots of gold. This week we talk about how numbers that you don't often hear about on ag shows, credits and debits, can affect farming. That's coming up next on At Issue. Thank you for joining us today on At Issue. I'm Fred Peralta. Recently, a 170-acre farm in rural Champaign County sold for the record price of $2,700,000, over $15,000 an acre. Last fall, a farm in Iowa went for even more. So everything is fine, right? Well, with me today to talk about farmland, high price of entry for farmers, and the machinations of the markets, both grain and financial, is Mark Cox, Vice President and Ag Lending for the First Mid-Illinois Bank and Trust. And Mark, when we talk about agriculture, we talk about big numbers, don't we?
Yeah, that's right, Fred. Agriculture as an industry comprises approximately 25% of the U.S. economy when you take into consideration all the aspects of agriculture, from production to processing, basically from getting the product from the farm gate to the consumer, all the steps that are involved in that process. So agriculture is a huge part of the American economy and one of the few industries in our country that provides a positive trade surplus when considering imports and exports.
Now, it's a big business nationally, but around here it is the big business, isn't it?
That's correct. We're very fortunate here in Coles County that we've got two larger cities, obviously educational institutions in both cities, some industry and so forth. So we may see a slightly diverse economy as compared to maybe going 45 miles south of here, where agriculture is basically the only industry.
So given its prominence in this area, how much do people really understand about how much it costs to farm, how much farmers can make farming?
Well, that's interesting, Fred, because if you look at the most recent numbers, less than 2% of the population in the United States actually lives and operates farms. Okay, so there are very, very few people who actually live on the farms. Now, there are a lot of absentee landowners, a lot of people whose family owns land and so has some familiarity, but it's a complex business, and then when you get the part of our society that really has no involvement in agriculture, that's a significant part of our society. So it is an area that a lot of people don't understand and don't have a background in.
So we have this big, huge business that we're dealing with. A lot of people don't understand it. Let's go over some of the recent issues involved in agriculture and talk about where they fit in and what's actually happening. The thing I led off with farmland values, is the most obvious sign of how tough it is to get into agriculture. Farmland prices have been going up 10% or so the last several years.
Right.
Is there a farmland bubble, and is the land worth that?
Well, it's a supply and demand market, okay? And one of the old adages they have in agriculture is they don't make any more of it,
right.
Okay? The other part that you have to consider is, we're located in what we refer to as the Corn Belt, okay? One of the primest agriculture production areas in the country. You can obviously go to some other parts of the country and they are not as productive. Land prices consequently are not as high. So yeah, they are, we've seen a perfect confluence of things come together. We've talked about low interest rates, a historically low interest rate environment, high commodity prices, increased demand, some disruptions in production with the drought and so forth. And those have all contributed to steadily rising farmland prices. Do we think they're in a bubble? We don't really see that right now.
Right.
When we talk about a land or a market being in a bubble situation, one of the things that we typically consider is, okay, if that market were to correct, is it reasonable to think that we might see a 50%, 60% decline in land values?
Okay.
Okay. We just do not see that in the near future. Okay. That with commodity prices where they're at, with the level of grain stocks, the trouble with predicting these matters are things can change so quickly.
Well, the problem with predicting those matters is you have to have a crystal ball.
And we don't.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's right.
So if somebody were to come to you and say, there's going to be 100 acres for sale, as a banker, what sort of process would you lead them through?
Well, one of the things that we do, it's quite an extensive process. I sometimes wish it would be as simple as yes or no, but it's much more. But what we tend to look at is we first start with their overall operation. And obviously, if they have an interest in it, it likely complements their operation, be it from a standpoint of increasing their land base, location, maybe makes an existing piece of property they have even more valuable because the two now come together and so forth. So we look at those factors and we look at their current operation and try to predict, okay, going forward, what will this look like, and is this a logical investment, not only for you, but you and your family.
Right.
So one of the things I always stress to my clients is that farmland is a long-term investment. Okay, we have these gyrations in the market,
right.
And if you were just going to go out and invest in something and you need that money 2 or 3 years from now, farmland's probably not the right investment.
Right.
The other thing I stress to my clients is oftentimes, the father and the mother are farmers. That's been their career. And their children may be off the farm, may be involved in an agribusiness, or may not be involved in agriculture at all. And I always say to them, it's important that your family work together and realize that this is a significant investment to your family, and there are right times and wrong times to be in it. And if the family, obviously, if the children aren't interested in that investment, why do you want to increase that amount of investment at that point in time? So there's a whole host of factors that we look at and go through with our clients to determine whether that's a proper investment for them. And then obviously we look at our underwriting guidelines from the standpoint of the credit facility.
Right. Now, recently a large farming business in Michigan is suspected to be going into bankruptcy because the vast majority of their land that they farm is cash rented. Do you take that into consideration when you look at farmers when they, their operation, as far as do they have enough capital to handle that?
Right, exactly. We look at the land base and not only what their cost of that land base is, but we also look at, okay, how long are your lease terms, okay? Because it's very difficult to provide credit in an environment where you only have a 1-year arrangement, okay? So a lot of times we'll see lease terms that are 3 to 5 years, and sometimes they're year to year, but the client has farmed the land for 20 years.
Right.
So you see a lot of things, but we look at a number of factors when it goes into analyzing the risk profile of an operation. There are a tremendous amount of risks in this business, not only with the weather, the commodity markets, and so forth. So,
Do you find that farmland is an emotional purchase?
It can be. It very well can be. I personally am from a 6th generation family, farm family, and I know I've had conversations with my father on many occasions. My father just recently retired as a CPA. I'm a banker, and I'm like, well, should we consider selling our operation at these high levels? And my dad made the comment to me, we don't sell anything. And it's very well ingrained in your family and your background.
It really does become part of the fabric of the family who farms it.
It does. It very much does.
Well, speaking of credits and CPAs and credits and debits and assets and liabilities and so forth, how is a typical farm organization use credit? I know in other businesses, line of credits and everything else is a huge factor.
Right.
But in farms, isn't it mostly a cash business?
No, not really. While the farmers oftentimes operate a lot on cash, typically you see farmers utilizing 3 different types of credit. You have a short-term, typically a 1-year line, we call it a line of credit for their operating needs. Typically their equipment loans will be anywhere from 3 to 7 years. A lot of times the farm equipment, they're going to have that piece of equipment for 10, 15 years. So, it makes more sense to pay for it over a little longer period of time. So typically in ag finance, we structure those loans a little longer than we would the short-term credits. Then obviously with the real estate financing, typically you see those anywhere from the range of 15 to up to 30 years as far as financing terms. So, while you have certain operations out there that, they've been in the business for a long, long time, they're very conservative, they may well use all of their cash to finance their operation going forward. But many times you see farm operations who do carry some debt, albeit at low levels. As I indicated to you, one of the things that has contributed to the strength in agriculture today is the very low debt levels that we have today. Much different, the typical farmer today has much less debt than he did in the 1980s.
Now, I remember the 80s, but I don't remember the farm crisis in the 80s.
Okay.
What happened then that caused the problem?
Well, there again, it was kind of a perfect confluence of issues, and they really boil down to 2 things. Significant overproduction in commodities. Had several years back to back where farmers were able to raise record levels of production, and at the same time demand for those products reduced. Okay. So we had an issue where we had much lower farm incomes than we had seen in typical years, particularly the 70s, which were a strong era with strong demand for commodities in the 70s. So everything just kind of flipped upside down in the 80s and was a real challenging environment in agriculture.
So was that, a friend of mine out of college started working at the family farm and had a chance to buy some neighboring ground, and I remember him over a cup of coffee, he went over the pros and cons of paying $2,000 an acre for this land. Obviously debt really bothered him at the time. I imagine that's true with a lot of farmers, isn't it?
They're very conservative as a group. And yes, it is a major concern, and oftentimes the young farmer looks at it as he has more time on his side. So he tends to be a little more willing than maybe his father would be to take on that debt. So yeah, that does enter into it, and especially with their conservative nature.
Right. Oh, well, speaking of conservative nature, how can you pay $500,000 for a combine or a planter or a tractor or, I look at the ag equipment out there and it just boggles my mind when I see that you can't live in these things, or maybe you can get too close to living in these things now.
Right. Well, and I'm not a spokesman for the major equipment manufacturers or anything, but one of the things I will tell you is they have made tremendous strides in the technology.
The technology is wonderful.
And the ability that these machines have compared to the ability that of a machine they manufactured 10 or 15 years ago. Obviously, a part of that price is the research and development that went into creating that excellent product. I mean, I know that some farmers, we laugh and joke about, well, they have green blood because they like John Deere equipment. Others have red because they like Case and so forth. But, and the other thing that's important to realize here is oftentimes when it comes to tractors and combines and pieces of equipment like that, I know farmers that utilize those machines for 20 and 30 years.
Right.
Okay, so it's not that they're going out and spending that kind of money every year on that piece of equipment.
Right, and it's also a function of the tax code for equipment depreciation and stuff, right?
Exactly, and in recent years, and it's an economic tool to spur the economy, but the government, the IRS, have allowed accelerated depreciation. We call it Section 179 depreciation, where the purchaser is allowed to depreciate that much faster than he would. Saves on taxes, and those benefits are calculated into the analysis of the purchase of that piece of equipment.
So, as far as other input costs, there's input costs of seed and fertilizer and herbicides and that sort of thing. There's also expenses in transportation, transporting the product from the farm to the elevators, all those other things. Are those prices, it seems to me those prices are doing nothing but going up too. How can a farmer plan in their business plan, and I assume you suggest a business plan, to handle these increasing costs?
Farmers are constantly working on their efficiencies, and one of the big, you mentioned several good items right on point, and one of the big ones is that all these are related to are fuel expenses.
Exactly.
Okay, and I listen to farmers' conversations all the time where they actually talk about doing different steps on their farm, and it's going to take them so many gallons of fuel to do that. And so, well, we're going to skip that because of the cost associated with the fuel. And so they look at almost each process in the operation and really keep that cost in mind when they're deciding how they're going to go about producing their crop each year.
So everything seems to be going up, at least, and of course, if you've been farming for a while, you're used to this. You're used to managing increased costs. You're hopefully making more money on your commodity prices, but you lived through some cycles and you've dealt with it. Young people getting into agriculture today, or young people wanting to get into agriculture today, face a much different challenge, don't they?
Right. It's a very capital-intensive business, and I often tell people, unless you have a family member or your family is directly involved in production agriculture, it's a very, very difficult industry to get into because of the capital requirements that go into it. And what I often try to discuss with young people that have an interest in agriculture is to broaden their horizons and explain to them all these different opportunities that exist in the industry, because oftentimes what their background is production agriculture. And obviously in this part of Illinois, that's grain production. Okay, one of the things I always like to stress to them is livestock production.
Right.
I come from West Central Illinois. We have in that part of the country a lot more cattle due to the type of land that we have and everything. And there's a lot of tremendous opportunities in other parts of agriculture. And another thing I stress to them, I always point out to them that the ag production industry is going to go through a real transformation here. I think I shared with you in a phone conversation
Right.
that the state of Iowa recently come out with a report that approximately 75% of the land in the state of Iowa is controlled by individuals that are 70 or older.
Wow.
And so as an industry, we're going to have a lot of change in the years coming up, and there again, change presents opportunity. And so I stress to these young people, if they have an interest in agriculture, there's a lot of people out there involved in agriculture who their families necessarily aren't, and yet they're going to be looking for some type of an exit strategy out of the business, and oftentimes are very interested in helping a young person get into the business.
So are there, that's an excellent point. What can a young person do to be there when the opportunities present themselves?
Well, and that's difficult, okay? and I tell them, okay, that's not just simply visiting with them one time.
Right,
Okay.
right.
You
I mean,
need it's like anything else. You need to network. Okay. You need to maintain those contacts with people. You need to keep them up to date on what you're doing.
Right.
Before I came over today, I had a conversation with a client of mine, and there's been some changes in their family operation, and I told them that, you know, they needed to contact other parties and keep them informed. Communication is critical in this business, and people want to be informed and want to know what the future holds for them. So I stress education. You know, the things that I have seen in my career and the changes that have come in agriculture, it's just mind-boggling. And I tell them oftentimes, you know, I have a bachelor's degree in my chosen field, but probably today you likely need a master's degree. That's how competitive, that's how quickly things are evolving. And I just stress, the more education you get, the more valuable you're going to be, and the more productive you're going to be.
Now, you, in that phone conversation, and it was a good phone conversation, people, but in that phone conversation, we talked about getting experience in other aspects of agriculture for young people in ag lending, and ag marketing, and research, and in other areas. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do that the rest of your life.
Correct.
So if a young person is interested in production agriculture, get the education, but also be known to the people who have what you need, correct?
Yes, and I stress, oftentimes, because they haven't been there, oftentimes a lot of young people interested in a career in agriculture don't realize that if you get involved in marketing, you get involved in research, you get involved with sales, a lot of your time is actually spent on the farm with producers.
Right.
Okay. Tremendous amount of contact, not just on the phone or via email and so forth. And so these are excellent opportunities to, there again, network, meet more people, have the opportunity to tell people that you have an interest in this business, and that's your ultimate goal, that's what you're working towards, is to be involved in agriculture, you know, be it the production side or whatever.
So as a young person, you stress the need for education. And in talking to the other farmers, I'm amazed everything they need to know: meteorology, mechanics, physics, biology, blah, 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 blah. What would you tell a young person is a good route to get the experience that you need?
Well, I think, you know, in the agriculture education area, they try to really diversify that educational experience and place you in situations where you get practical, hands-on experience as well. And I think most employers today realize, okay, short of you being raised on a farm, it's pretty difficult to obtain that hands-on experience. So a lot of times, you know, they look at okay, what employment did they take maybe during their college years if they looked for a part-time job?
Right.
Okay, were they able to work at a farm or an implement dealership or a fertilizer chemical supplier to get some of that hands-on experience? Because agriculture is an industry where things are so specific. A lot of times the companies look at, we'll teach you once you're on board what you're going to need to know in your job and how to do that job.
Right.
But they typically want a well-rounded individual as well.
Okay, we only have about a minute left. As the money guy, okay, what should farmers be looking at and what should farmers be concerned about?
One of the things that I think that the big component is the commodity markets, okay? Fortunately today we have an excellent crop insurance program. It's well used by farmers. It does provide some protection. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people believe that if they have high levels of crop insurance, which they typically carry, that, well, we don't really need to worry about the markets as much because we have that protection. Problem is you can change your income level significantly. Marketing is still very important. So I stress to a lot of my clients to stay on top of the markets, set their goals for these prices, and when those prices do present themselves, to act on that.
Well, we have gone from RFD to GPS, and there's a lot to think about. Mark Cox, Vice President of Ag Lending for First Mid Illinois Bank and Trust, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for joining us.